Hey guys, I'm back here in Minecraft, and we are still considering the water temple. And I've gotten, some comments on the last video, which is interesting and somewhat helpful. But so a lot of people, and it's quite natural. It's not like I'm saying that you guys are doing a bad job or anything like that. It's quite natural for people to just state their own opinion, or they describe something that they like, and they suggest that for people. But as someone who's studied architecture, and as someone who's done a little bit of teaching of architecture as well, what you want to be doing, if you want to be giving advice, is to go back to what the designer wants to do, instead of just saying what you think you would like to do in their position. I mean, the point is the designer wants to do a certain thing, and you need to, and the best way to give suggestion is to go back to that, because ultimately it's their design. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm not appreciating your feedback or anything. I do, and it's useful to consider other people's opinions, but I think the best way to go about it is to whenever you get to a design process and you're kind of stuck somewhere, then just go back to your ideas and ask the question, what is it that you were trying to do in the first place? And that's why we're in here, of course. Remember this, right? The glass and the light, and the end bit is open to the sky, and so the light streams in. In fact, it was more like, oh, it is a moody, that's good. So turn that down to, to moody. So turn the brightness down. So this is the original kind of idea, or the original thoughts, is to create this light and dark and the contrast and all that. And of course the design has moved on from there, but that is still the original intention. And then down here the idea was to have three kind of areas. So we turn the brightness down, and you might notice that it's different from the last video. It's a lot darker. And in fact, when I do that, you might not actually be able to see anything in the YouTube video at all. So there's this, which is fairly dim. And then there's supposed to be a dark area, and then behind that a light area. And so this is mostly correct. And by correct, I mean this is mostly a good reflection of what I intended to do earlier. I think, notwithstanding all the suggestions that you guys have given me, and which I have considered, but, again, going back to what I originally intended, I think the conclusion we should draw from this, or that I draw from this, is that the darkness is not particularly interesting. I want the darkness for the contrast. And so, this is important to have, but at the same time it's not interesting, and therefore we don't want a huge space of it. And so I think I'm going to go back to the original plan. Remember, the circle was meant to be in the center, and then later I moved off center because the plan looked better that way. But now that we've built a mock-up of it in dirt, I think the conclusion is that there's no point to having this space because the darkness is not that interesting. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to try moving that back to the center, so then the water would start there, and so there'll still be a dark corridor, but the space is a lot smaller, and so it's not interesting. But if you make it smaller, then that doesn't really matter. You get through it fairly quickly. And also, to emphasize the contrast between the three spaces, I believe these entrances need to be a lot smaller. A lot smaller. So if you imagine the entrance is no bigger than that. Imagine if all of that is water as well, until you get down to here. And the same for this doorway. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm not sure because, well, I can test that out quite easily too, because I kind of want to be able to see some of it as you walk down, but at the same time I want it to be smaller, just so that for one you can keep the light out a bit more, and two, you make it so that there's a bigger contrast between the spaces. Actually no, I might leave this one that big, and then in this one we can make the actual entrance smaller because it's water anyway and you can see through it. So you exclude the light, you exclude more of the light, but then you can still see through the space. So yeah, I'll do that one for here, and move the circle back into the center, therefore making the dark space a lot smaller, and then you don't have the big empty space with nothing in it. And also that transfers the focus back into the central circle, which is what I was intending in the first place. I mean, this is supposed to be the main area, the main space, and that outside was, I never had any ideas about what to do with it, and in fact I didn't actually want anything here in the first place, I wanted the central circle to be the main space. So we'll shift that back to the center, see how that works. I suspect it will work a bit better, but I might be wrong. That's why you always have to test your ideas and not just build what you think is right. It's nighttime, so maybe I should turn this back up so you guys can actually see stuff in the video. And here I was also thinking maybe in the corridor I will have these columns going up as well, because again, to emphasize the contrast, I was thinking maybe the light areas will be open and then the dark areas will be fairly crowded, so you feel like you're being cramped in and all that, and then the light area in the middle will be open again. Again, playing with contrast, playing with emphasizing the differences between the spaces to create a sort of a dramatic effect. Okay, I think that's enough talking for now. I do like that. I mean, one of the comments was saying how if you want the temple to be peaceful, maybe you don't want the vertical things, you want the horizontal. Because horizontal shapes are more peaceful, whereas this seems fairly dramatic and a little bit oppressive as well. But no, I think this is right, because then, again, we're playing with the contrast. The outside can be all monumental and oppressive, but then the interior, the center, can be serene and simple. And so once again, talking about contrast, talking about emphasizing the difference between the spaces and the feeling of each space. So if we're gonna do that, then I gotta have to reconsider the shape of these things again. Do I want it to be all square and simple, like a simple circle in here, or do I want these arches? Maybe the arch is a little too complicated, and maybe I want to just do a basic circular shape instead, and maybe I don't want these columns, maybe I just want the water, and maybe I can make it so that the circle is supported by the walls instead of by the columns on the inside. Yeah, so things to think about. But again, I really think the right way to design is always, if you kind of stuck, or even if you're not stuck, just every so often go back to your ideas, go back to what you were originally intending to do, and just double check that you are doing those things, because that's what your design was always meant to be in the first place. And if you allow your design to just kind of creep away from you and go towards things that you were never intending to do, then that's not really a good design process, because you're just drifting. You're drifting off course and you're doing other things. Yeah, enough talking for now. I'm gonna have to spend some time rebuilding this, about 6 blocks in this direction, so that's gonna take a little bit of time, and we'll see how that turns out. And yeah, like always, take the time to think. Like I took a couple of days off and then came back to look at it with fresh ideas and a fresh mind. And that's important to like give yourself time to design. If you try to rush things, then you're not giving yourself time. You're not giving yourself time to do it properly. Alright, I'll be back. Okay, so we're back to this stage, without the circle in the middle, without the water. And I was just thinking that this looks fairly good. You know, there's not the contrast between the dark and the light and all that, of course, but just as a space, I think the centralized arrangement is better. We're having things centered. And we can always double check that as well. Like when you walk in like this, you never get to see the plan, and so I don't think the asymmetrical plan is really worthwhile in this case, because the arrangement of spaces is such that you're always kind of well, I am always trying to highlight differences and to separate one space from another, and so you don't get to see the asymmetry or see whether there's a purpose or whether it looks better or not. And so, you know, I guess this highlights an issue with design and with drawing plans, is that things that look good in plan might not work out when you build it in 3D. So, you know, again, with architecture you really have to consider all the different views and all the different ways that your architecture will be experienced, and not just, you know, draw symbols on a piece of paper and think it looks good there and then build it, or, you know, just consider one view or one concept artwork or one angle and then build it. You know, to make good architecture you really have to consider things that you might not have imagined when you're just drawing it, but when you actually make it and look at it, then you'll see things that you might have missed in your ideas. Anyway, I guess I'll go back to building. You know, this by itself is it's an okay space, but it's not doing what we originally wanted to do, so keep going, keep on going. Okay, so we're back at this point. Entrance. The circle is shifted back this way. The water will be over here, and I guess I really need to put the water in before we can see what the effect will be like. But you can kind of see that the entrance to the inner circle is much closer now, and the dark area will be a lot smaller. If you can imagine, water will be about there, and then this will be quite dark. And, you know, the inner entrance is very close to the outer entrance, and it's also a lot smaller. I was trying to decide whether I should make the inner circle lower, like extend this downwards a bit more, but I can't really decide. It looked a bit too high before I built the inner entrance, but then now that I've built it, it seems kind of okay. Maybe like 1 or 2 blocks lower, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I guess we can test that out later on, once the water is in. Yeah, I guess I'll do that. I mean, there's not much to say about it right now as it is. Yep. I guess I'll have to do that on the other side as well, so whatever that is, 1, 2, 3. 2, 3, and then yep, and then that basically just stops the water from pouring into the gateway, as it were. And these bits at either end stops the water from flowing out that way. And also at the moment the circle is kind of just floating in midair. And I wonder if I should connect it to the walls somehow. I mean, you know, in the game there's no real gravity. It's not like that's a problem. It's not like it's a structural problem. It's just a game, right? But at the same time, you know, it looks strange to have things just floating in the air. And I guess this comes back to whether we are playing by Minecraft rules or by real world rules. In the real world you can't have things floating in the air. In Minecraft you can. So whether one is more important than the other. I mean, everything I've built so far mostly conforms to real world rules. Actually no, let me rephrase that. Structurally they conform to real world rules because that looks correct. And people, you know, people assume that they should by default. But then the things I build are only worthwhile in the game. You know, things like the zombie arena, things like the chicken farm. A lot of those things, you know, they only make sense in the game. I don't build houses, I don't build castles because I've briefly explained it in some of the comments. You don't need a house in Minecraft, you know, you don't need a castle in Minecraft. You can have something that looks like a castle, but that doesn't actually function as a castle because you don't need castles. What, someone's gonna lay siege to your town, or you know, someone's gonna bring in a catapult and start demolishing your lands? It doesn't work like that, right? You know, there's none of that in Minecraft. If you want to keep out mobs, then something a lot simpler than a castle will do the trick. Anyway, that's kind of not too relevant, except to point out that, you know, there's like a conflict between how things work in game and how things work in the real world, and it might be worth considering which set of assumptions to follow. Whether you build something that makes